My name is Megan Townsend, and I was 26 years old the night my parents told me I was getting married. I had never been on a date with the man they chose. My father owed him money, and I was how the debt got paid. His name was Harlan Voss. He was 52. He had already divorced 2 wives, and nobody in our valley thought that was strange. What I found on page 41 of my father's ledger was only the beginning. I spent the next 2 years learning exactly what that man had buried and how to dig it up without ever raising my voice. And when he came back, flowers in one hand, a folder claiming I was mentally ill in the other, my mother begging me to come home, none of them knew what I had already set in motion. Stories. This channel is where quiet women finally get loud. Stories about family, betrayal, and the moment somebody decides that enough is enough. If you have ever been told to keep the peace at your own expense, this story is for you. Drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe because you will not want to miss how this one ends. To picture my life, you have to picture Beulah Valley. 40 families, 1 white church, 1 gravel road in, and the same gravel road out. We called ourselves a covenant community. That meant we married each other, buried each other, and owed each other money in a circle that never quite closed. My family ran Townsend Feed and Seed, the store my great-grandfather built, and I kept the books. I liked the books. Numbers were the one place in my life where I was allowed to tell the truth. If the corn account was short, I could say so out loud, and nobody told me to soften my tone. I was 26, unmarried, which in our valley made me a question people asked my mother in the church parking lot. I did the payroll, the invoices, the quarterly taxes. I also did the ledger, the tall gray book where my father recorded what we owed and who we owed it to. 2 years of drought had carved a number into that book that made my stomach hurt every time I balanced it. We had borrowed from the Covenant Fund, which was a polite way of saying we had borrowed from Harlan Voss, because the fund was his money wearing the church's name. 900 acres, a white truck, soft hands. Everyone said Brother Voss was generous. Everyone said it the way you say a dog is friendly while you keep your hand out of reach. That fall, my father stopped letting me reconcile the back pages of the ledger. He would take the book into his office after supper and close the door, and when he brought it back, the last page smelled like his pipe, and he would not look at me. I told myself he was tired. I told myself drought years make men quiet. But a bookkeeper knows what it means when someone starts hiding one specific page from the person who checks the math. It means the math has become something you would be ashamed to show her. It took me until October to find out that the shameful number had my name on it. Harlan Voss came to dinner on a Sunday in October. I knew something was wrong before he knocked, because my mother had ironed the good tablecloth, the one that only came out for funerals and the pastor. She had also made scalloped potatoes with ham, and when I asked why, she said, "Harlan favors them," in the tone of a woman reciting something she had memorized. That was the first thing that scared me. She already knew his favorites. He arrived at 6, on the minute, and complimented the potatoes before he tasted them. He was tall and clean and smelled like cedar, and he talked to my father about hay prices and to my mother about her pie crust and to me about nothing at all, which I later understood was the point. You do not interview a payment. Dessert came, and my father set down his fork and said, "Megan, Brother Voss has spoken for you." Spoken for. Like a parcel at the post office. I looked around the table and waited for someone to laugh, and nobody laughed. My mother studied her hands. My sister Ruth studied the window. Harlan smiled at me the way a man smiles at a good used truck, kind and appraising at the same time, and said he knew this was sudden, and that he believed an ordered home was the greatest gift a man could offer a woman. I heard myself ask very politely about his first 2 wives. The room went still. Harlan did not flinch. He said, "Some women cannot receive order, Megan. I pray you are not one of them." My father exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath for a month, and I sat there doing what I do best, which is arithmetic. 52 years old, 2 wives gone, 900 acres, 1 drought debt with my father's signature on it. I did not know the exact shape of the deal yet, but I knew there was a deal, because in Beulah Valley, there was always a deal, and the women were always the last to see the invoice. I said no that night. I want that on the record, because of what they said about me later. I did not scream it or throw a plate. I waited until Harlan's truck cleared the cattle guard, and then I stood in the kitchen and said, "I'm not going to marry him." My father looked at the table. My mother started drying a dish that was already dry. Nobody yelled. In my family, no one ever raised their voice. They didn't need to. The punishment arrived quietly, the way frost does. Monday morning, my father drove to town before I was dressed and came back with my week's schedule rearranged. The school in Marion Falls, where I worked 3 afternoons as a classroom aide, the one job I had ever held outside our valley, had been informed that I was needed at home to prepare for my wedding. He had not asked me. He had simply unplugged the one part of my life that ran on a different current. "It's for the best, Meg," he said, hanging up his hat. "A bride has responsibilities." I stood in the hallway doing my arithmetic again. That job paid $11 an hour, and it was mine. Those children knew my name. Mrs. Alvarez, the teacher I assisted, drank her coffee black and trusted me to run the reading circle, and on my last Tuesday she had told me I was good enough to get certified someday, a real teacher, and I had carried that sentence home in my chest like a live coal. Gone now, with one phone call I never got to hear. That was the moment I understood the rules of the game I had been entered into. They were not going to drag me to the altar by my hair. Nothing so honest. They were going to remove, one by one, every version of my life that did not have Harlan Voss in it, until walking down that aisle looked like my own idea. It is a very effective method. I want you to remember that it almost worked. People ask how a mother could go along with it. I need you to understand my mother because hating her is easy and useless. Carol Townsend was 53 years old, and she had never once, in my hearing, finished a sentence that began with the words, "I want." She kept a garden that could feed 10 people and a recipe box organized better than most banks. She was gentle, she was tireless, and she had been, her whole life, a perfectly obedient daughter of Beulah Valley, which meant her love came pre-shaped, like dough pressed into a pan she did not choose. The week after the dinner, she began teaching me the wedding cake. Not asking, teaching. She set the flour and the butter on the counter like a catechism and guided my hands through the creaming and the folding, and her voice was soft the whole time, and it was the most violent thing anyone did to me that month. "Your grandmother made this cake for me," she said. "I made it for Ruth." At the mention of Ruth, my sister got up from the corner chair and left the kitchen without a word. My mother's hands did not pause. "You'll fight it at first," she said, sifting. I did too. "But a house needs peace, Megan, and peace in this house is bought with your yes." She said it kindly. That is what I need you to hear. She said it the way you tell a child the stove is hot, as a fact about the world, a law of nature she had tested with her own skin. Peace in this house is bought with your yes. I stood there with butter on my fingers and understood that my mother was not going to save me, not because she did not love me, but because nobody had ever saved her, and she had made her peace with the price, and could not imagine a daughter who wouldn't. What happened to Ruth, I wondered, that made her leave a warm kitchen at the mention of her own wedding cake? It took me 4 more nights to find out. My sister Ruth was 31, and she had lived back home for 5 years, and we did not talk about why. Thursday night she came up to my attic room with 2 mugs of chamomile and sat on the end of my bed the way she used to when I was small. For a while she just held her tea. Then she said, "I was 17. You were 12. Do you actually remember it? Or just the pictures?" I remembered white ribbons on the fence and that I got to hold the flowers. I remembered thinking Caleb Mercer looked old, and being told 26 wasn't old for a groom. "Dad owed his family for the North Field," Ruth said, flat, like a weather report. "The families called it a good match. I called it that too. You want to know the secret of our valley, Meg? Nobody forces you. They just arrange the world until you say yes on your own, and then forever after, they get to say you chose it." 9 years with Caleb Mercer. She never told me what those years held. Not that night. Not for a long time. and I am not going to invent it for you. She came home at 26 with 2 suitcases and a face that had learned to apologize for existing. Our parents took her in and never once said Caleb's name at dinner again, the way you would not mention rope in the house of a man who survived a hanging. I asked if she was warning me to run. Ruth laughed, a small, terrible laugh I still hear sometimes. Run where? On what money? No. Sign, Meg. That's my honest advice. They'll tell you it's love. It's arithmetic. And girls who run make the arithmetic worse for everyone they leave behind. She set her mug down and stopped at the door. Harlan's not like Caleb, she said. He's smarter. Caleb wanted a wife. Harlan collects debts. I lay awake most of that night, not because of what she said about Harlan, because my sister, 9 years sold and 5 years home, had looked me in the eye and told me the smart move was to get in the wagon. That was the ally I had. I found page 41 on the last day of October, doing the month-end close. My father had gotten careless or tired and left the ledger on the office desk while he walked the fence line with the dog. I was not snooping. I want that clear. Reconciling that book was my job, had been for 6 years, and I turned the pages the way I did every month until I reached the back section he had been hiding, and there it was in his careful block printing. The covenant loan. $41,000, 2 drought years' worth, interest accruing at a rate that made my jaw tighten. And beneath the running balance, dated the Sunday of the scalloped potatoes, a single new line, H.V. Note, satisfied upon covenant, satisfied upon covenant. A wedding, in our valley's language, the debt would not be paid, it would be forgiven, in exchange for me. There was even a tidy bracket where he had zeroed out the interest, the way you'd note a trade-in on a tractor. I carried the book out to the porch and stood there while my father came up from the field, and I held it open to page 41, and I asked him what it meant, though I knew what it meant. He took his gloves off slowly. My father is not a cruel man. I have to keep saying that. He looked past me, out at the brown fields that had failed him twice, and he said, "A daughter is how a family pays its debts." He said it like an apology. He said it like a proverb his own father had handed him, worn smooth from being carried in the pocket. And the worst part is, I recognized the sentence. It was the same one that had been written under Ruth's wedding photo, in a language of entries and balances I had been keeping for them all along and had somehow never read. That night I stopped being a daughter. I became a line item. And a line item, I decided, staring at the attic ceiling, has one advantage a daughter does not. A line item understands the books. Here is what I did first, because I have heard people say I should have just called the police, as if the thought never crossed my mind. I called the police. The first week of November, I told my mother I was returning canning jars to the Hendersons, and I drove to the county sheriff's office in Marion Falls and sat across a desk from a deputy named Kim Ostrander, a woman about 40 with a coffee mug that said, "World's okayest aunt." I laid it all out. The debt, the dinner, the ledger line, the wedding being planned around me like weather. She listened all the way through, which I appreciated, and then she folded her hands and gave it to me straight. "You're 26. You can walk out of that house today and nobody can stop you. But an engagement isn't a crime. A father forgiving a loan isn't a crime. Unless someone locks a door or raises a hand, there's no charge here." I asked what exactly would have to happen to me before it became her business, and she had the decency to look tired. "I know how it sounds," she said. "The law protects you from being kidnapped. It doesn't protect you from being cornered." She walked me to the door, and in the parking lot she stopped and said one more thing, quieter. "The adults in these arrangements, that's a hard road, legally. But if you ever see a minor in that pipeline, a girl under 18 being promised, moved, married off, that is a different phone call. That one I can work with. You hear me?" I said I heard her. I drove home with my hands steady on the wheel and that phrase rattling in the truck cab like a loose bolt, a minor in the pipeline. I was thinking of it as a legal curiosity, a door for somebody else's emergency. I did not know yet that I had already met the girl who would walk through it, or that she was 16, or that she called Harlan Voss uncle at the Christmas potluck. I'll get there. The library in Marion Falls let you keep books 3 weeks, and I had 4 of Mrs. Alvarez's paperbacks to return before my world shrank to the valley for good. I found her in her empty classroom on a Tuesday afternoon, stapling turkeys to a bulletin board, and when she saw me, her face did something complicated. Glad, then careful. She had heard about my wedding preparations. Everyone had. I meant to hand her the books and go. Instead, I stood in a classroom that smelled like pencil shavings and told her everything, page 41 included, while she stapled one turkey slowly to death. When I finished, she did not hug me or cry for me, and I will love her until I die for that. She went to her desk, took out a battered blue booklet, a citizen's rights handbook from a legal aid nonprofit, and put it in my hands like it was contraband, which in my house, it was. Read the chapter on domestic coercion, she said, then the one on child protection, twice. Inside the cover she had tucked a bus schedule and a card for the county library, Marion Falls branch. Back room, Tuesday nights. I tutor, 6 to 9. Anyone can come study. Then she told me about the girl from our valley, 6 years before. I will not say her name, whom she had reported to the state when the child came to school with a wedding band on a chain. The case had died in a month. Everyone in a position to confirm it said nothing, she said. The girl said nothing. The family said it was a purity gift. You cannot save a person who cannot yet say the words, but you can make sure they know which words work and who has to listen. She looked at me over her glasses. Knowing your rights isn't rebellion, Megan. It's literacy. I put the booklet inside my coat, flat against my ribs, and it sat there the whole drive home, warm, like the live coal had come back. Tuesday nights, 6 to 9. I started planning my lies immediately. For 3 Tuesdays in November, I told my mother I was cataloging donations for the church rummage sale, and I drove 40 minutes to the back room of the Marion Falls Library and learned my letters. That is what it felt like. Learning to read a language that had been spoken over my head my whole life. Mrs. Alvarez brought coffee and did her grading at the next table while I filled a spiral notebook. I learned what a mandated reporter is. Teachers, nurses, doctors, counselors. People required by law to report suspected abuse or neglect of a minor, whether they want to or not, whether the family objects or not. I learned that a report from a child's own mouth, specific, dated, first person, is the hardest kind to bury. I learned the state hotline number and that you can call it anonymously, and what happens after: screeners, caseworkers, law enforcement cross reports. The whole quiet machine that lives one county over from people like mine and might as well be on the moon for how often anyone dials it. I learned that in our state, a 16-year-old cannot marry a man over 21 at all, no parental signature on earth makes it legal, and that this was new law, and that there were still states within a day's drive where the arithmetic was looser. I wrote that page twice. I did not fully know why yet. Call it a bookkeeper's instinct for where the fraud will be. My notebook went home under the truck seat, then into the kitchen, into the one place my mother would never audit. The baking powder tin, wedged under the liner, because my mother buys baking powder twice a year, and it was November. Peace in this house is bought with your yes. Fine. But nobody had ever specified what my hands did while my mouth kept the peace. Driving home from the 3rd Tuesday, I felt almost calm for the first time since October. Then I came over the last hill, and Harlan's white truck was parked in our yard, and every light in the house was on. He was at the kitchen table with my parents, and when I came in, my mother stood up and said they would give us a moment, as if a moment alone with him were a gift I had requested. He waited until the door swung shut. Sit down, Megan, please. I sat, because the notebook was 10 feet away in a baking powder tin and my heart was hitting my ribs like a fist. Up close, Harlan Voss did not play the villain. That is important. He poured me coffee. He asked about the feed store's margins like a man who respected that I would know them. And then he made his offer, calm and thorough, like a loan officer. A piano, because he had heard I played as a girl. A library room, south-facing. An account of my own for household spending. I believe a wife should handle real numbers. An ordered life. He said that phrase twice, and the second time he let a little tiredness show, and for one strange moment I saw it. A 52-year-old man in a big empty house, twice left, terrified in whatever locked room he kept his fear in, that the valley had started to wonder what was wrong with him. 2 women left my table, Megan, he said quietly. A house needs a wife, the way a field needs rain. I almost felt it, the pull of pity. Then he smiled and added, I think you're wiser than they were. The library in Marion Falls? Tuesdays, isn't it? I think it's fine. A woman improving her mind. Some men would mind. I don't. The coffee went to ash in my mouth. He had known, maybe all 3 weeks, and he wanted me to know he knew, gently, the way you tap a fence wire to show it's electric. That was the real offer on the table. Nothing about me would ever be secret again, and it would all be permitted, item by a man who kept accounts. He stood, thanked my mother for the coffee through the door, and left. I sat very still and understood that running was now a math problem with a clock on it. December came down like a lid. First it was the money. My father drove me to the bank in Creed's Crossing, the little branch where my savings had lived since I was 16. 4,000 and change, 10 years of aid pay and egg money. And told me, in front of a teller he had known 30 years, that we were restructuring accounts to simplify the wedding expenses. I had actually tried to get ahead of this. 2 weeks earlier, I had gone in to move the money quietly and learned that an account opened for a 16-year-old is opened jointly with her father, and that his name had never come off, and that the teller, kindly, helpfully, offered to call him for me while I stood there. So now I stood at the counter and signed the new paperwork, both signatures to withdraw, because a scene would have cost me Tuesdays. Consider that the price of my calm, $4,000. Then it was the date. 3rd Sunday of May, announced at supper like rain. The reading of intentions, our Valley's engagement rite, set for the last Sunday of February. And then it was Ruth. Harlan mentioned, through my father, that his housekeeper had quit, and that it would be a kindness, with the wedding coming, for Ruth to keep his house in the meantime. A woman shamed by one marriage, packed off to dust the shelves of the next one, and everyone at the table nodded, because it kept her useful, and it kept her close to the arrangement, a soft hostage wearing an apron. She went without a word to me. And 2 days before Christmas, my cousin Sadie bounced into our kitchen holding a tin of divinity candy, 16 years old, wearing a new coat I did not recognize, and delivered the sentence that ended my private war and started my real one. Guess what? She said, glowing, reciting it like a memory verse she'd been given. Uncle Harlan says his nephew Gideon is going to court me when I turn 17. He already talked to Daddy about it. She twirled once, showing off the coat. It fit her perfectly. Somebody had already taken her measurements. A minor in the pipeline. Deputy Ostrander's phrase came back to me so hard I had to set down the dish I was drying. That night I did what I do. I made a ledger. On one side, what I knew. Sadie Kaplan, 16, my mother's sister's girl, whose father owed money, everyone's father owed money, to the Covenant Fund. Gideon Voss, Harlan's nephew, 24, quiet. Land coming to him. A courtship announced for her 17th birthday, which fell in June, 1 month after my wedding. And one thing more, which I had written twice in a spiral notebook without knowing why. In our state, she could not legally marry him. Not at 17. Which meant either the courtship was a long one, or the paperwork would not be done in our state. I thought about the phrase I had heard my whole life for Valley weddings that happened quickly and quietly. They went to see Pastor Farrell's people. Pastor Farrell had people 2 states over. I had bookkept enough Valley weddings to know some of those licenses came back with county names I had to look up. On the other side of my ledger, what I could do. Option 1, run now. I had a bus schedule, a teacher, and $41 of undeclared egg money. Every day I stayed, the walls got closer, and the reading of intentions was 8 weeks out. Option 2. Stay. Stay inside the arrangement, keep my yes hanging in the air like weather, and use the one thing nobody suspects a compliant bride of doing, listening, to learn the schedule of Sadie's transaction. Dates, counties, names, the specific, first person, reportable facts that make the quiet machine start walking. I sat with that choice a long time. I want to be honest about what it cost, because this is the part I would do differently if I were braver or stupider. Staying meant smiling at Harlan Voss. It meant cake lessons. It meant my mother's relieved face at my softening, which broke my heart in a way Harlan never managed to touch. I chose to stay. God help me, I chose the books. Two things happened in January, and they are the two things this whole story balances on. The first, on a Sunday night when my parents drove to a funeral visitation in Creed's Crossing, I let myself into the dark feed store with my own key, turned on no lights, and opened the ledger on the counter by the glow of my flashlight. I copied page 41 onto 2 sheets of carbon paper. The loan, the interest, the bracket, and the line, HV, note satisfied upon covenant, in my father's block hand. My hands shook. My pen did not. A bookkeeper's pen learns early to keep its own counsel. Folded in quarters, taped flat under the liner of the baking powder tin, next to the notebook. If you remember one object from this story, remember that page. The second thing, Sadie. She had started coming Saturdays to help me with wedding sewing, which meant sitting cross-legged on my bed talking while I pinned hems. I did not recruit her. I need that understood. She was 16, and there are things you do not put on a child, and aiming her at her own family is one of them. What I did was teach her to read. I told her about my job at the school, and worked around, slowly, to Mrs. Alvarez, and then to a plain fact, offered the way you leave a key on a windowsill. If anything ever scares you, anything, anyone, you can tell the school nurse, or a teacher. Say it plain, with days and names. They're not allowed to keep it secret. It's the law. It's not tattling. It's how the law listens. Sadie went quiet, pinning a hem. Then she said, "What if the thing that scares you is a coat that fits?" And looked up at me, and she was not glowing anymore. And I understood she had known longer than I had. I did not press. I said the windowsill sentence one more time, and we sewed. Late that night, I checked my carbon copy in the tin and noticed, for the first time, a fainter line further down page 41. An older entry, dated the spring Ruth turned 17. If you have ever been told that keeping the peace was your job, that your quiet was the glue holding your family together, stay with me, because what I found next is the reason I'm telling this story out loud. Subscribe if you believe daughters are not debts, and let's keep going. Because in late January, the trail led out of the valley. Harlan's second wife had a first name nobody said, and a last name I found on a water-stained receipt in the feed store files, a delivery of fence posts, 11 years old, signed for at the Voss place by L. Voss, back when she still signed things. Lorna. Through a church newsletter archive in the library and a Tuesday night of patient digging, I found her. Remarried, living in Ohio, listed in a quilting guild. I called from the library phone at 8 on a Tuesday, heart so loud I could barely hear the ring. When I said my name and my valley, the line went so quiet I thought she had hung up. I told her I was supposed to marry Harlan Voss in May. I asked if there was anything she wished someone had told her. The silence stretched long enough that Mrs. Alvarez looked up from her grating. Then Lorna said, in a voice like a door coming off a latch, "Ask him what happened to the money my father paid." And she hung up. I stood holding the receiver, cold to the elbows. Money her father paid. Paid. Not borrowed, not owed. Paid in, like a toll. I had assumed I knew the shape of Harlan's business. He lent, and forgave, and collected women the way a bank collects collateral. But a payment flowing the other direction, from a bride's father to Harlan, was a different animal with different teeth. It meant the marriages themselves had a price of admission. It meant somewhere there was paper. And if 11 years of bookkeeping had taught me anything, it is that men who believe they will never be audited keep the most honest records in the world. I went home, and I started making a list of notaries. Lorna called the library back the next Tuesday and asked for the girl from Beulah Valley, and Mrs. Alvarez handed me the phone with a look that said she was officially not hearing any of this. Lorna talked for 40 minutes. I filled 9 notebook pages. The Covenant Fund, she said, was a press, and it worked in one motion. Harlan lent to families in trouble, drought, medical bills, a barn fire, at kindness rates, papered by a notary he trusted 2 counties over. When the debt ripened, he offered satisfaction, a marriage, his own or a nephew's, and with it a covenant gift. Money the bride's family paid him, dressed up as tradition, dowry in reverse. Her father had paid $6,000 for the honor of settling his loan with his daughter. When Lorna left after 7 years, Harlan came after her family for what he called the unamortized value of the arrangement. She said that phrase twice, so I would get it exact. Unamortized value. Of a wife. And the first wife, Marnie, the one the valley said had run wild, had left with a protective order from a county court. Sealed away where no Beulah Valley deacon would ever think to look, because nobody in the valley believed courts were for family matters. 2 wives, 2 paper trails, 1 notary. He is not careless, Lorna said before she hung up. He is the opposite of careless. Every dollar is written down somewhere, because in his heart he is a righteous man keeping honest books for a business he believes God approves of. I sat back and looked at my 9 pages. A fraud is hardest to see from inside its own arithmetic. Inside, it just looks like the way things are. But laid out in one column, dated, it had a shape, and the shape had a name, and the name was not marriage. The reading of intentions was 3 weeks away. I kept sewing my own hems. The reading of intentions happened the last Sunday of February, in the fellowship hall, under crepe paper bells my mother had saved from Ruth's. Both families in rows, ham on the long table, Pastor Farrell beaming like a man watching 2 healthy accounts merge. I wore the blue dress my mother made, and I smiled, because by then my smile was a tool I kept sharp for exactly this. Harlan stood and took my hand. His was soft and dry, a hand that had never once been surprised, and gave a little speech about order and provision and the wisdom of the fathers. And then he honored my father, that was the word he used, honored, and said, Dale put it best when we shook on it, a daughter is how a family pays its debts. He said it warmly. That is the detail I need you to sit with. He said it as a compliment, and the room made a warm sound back, a chuckle, an amen. My uncle raising his coffee. 40 families nodding at the sentence that had a bracket and a zeroed interest column behind it on page 41. I stood in the middle of that warmth like a woman standing in a river in January, and I smiled, and inside I finished the last calculation. There was no one in this room to appeal to. The room agreed. The room had always agreed. The room was built out of agreement, board by board. On the way to the cars, Ruth caught my arm in the dark between the propane tank and the kitchen door. She pressed something small and cold into my hand and closed my fingers over it. The spare key to the laundry room. That window doesn't lock from the outside, she said, not looking at me. It never has. I used to stand at it and count my chances. She let go. You still have yours. That's the whole difference, Meg. I left on the 2nd Friday of March, the night before the engagement blessing, the church rite that would seal what February's reading had announced, when the house was heavy with casserole and sleep. There is no dramatic version of it, and I will not pretend one. I wore 2 sweaters. I took the baking powder tin, notebook, carbon copies, $41 of egg money, and my library card, and I went out through the laundry room window my sister had spent 9 years looking through, and I walked the 2 miles to Route 9 in the dark with my breath loud in my ears, every dog in the valley informing on me. The 5:40 Milk Run bus to Marion Falls stops if you stand under the light and wave. The driver had a thermos and asked no questions. I watched the valley come up gray in the window and understood I was watching it for the last time as anyone's daughter. And at 9 that morning, from the payphone outside the Marion Falls Library, before fear could talk me down to something reasonable, I made the call. Not to complain about my wedding. That was never a crime. Ostrander had drawn me that map in November. I called the state hotline about Sadie Kaplan, 16, and I gave them the plain, dated, first-person facts. The announced courtship, the coat, the June birthday, the arrangement between her father and Harlan Voss, and the phrase I had bookkept behind a dozen Quick Valley weddings. Pastor Farrell's people, 2 states over, where the paperwork was looser. A conspiracy to move a minor across state lines for a marriage that our state had made illegal. The screener took it all. She asked how I knew. I said I keep books. When I hung up, my hands finally shook. Both of them. All the way. Behind me the library was opening. Somewhere back down Route 9, my mother was finding an empty attic and a window standing open, and my old life was over. Good, I told the shaking. Now we work. Here is the part I could not have scripted and did not. Sadie beat me by 5 days, and I only learned it later. The coat had scared her more than anyone knew, the coat that fit. And on the Monday before I climbed out the window, she had walked into the school nurse's office in Creed's Crossing complaining of a headache, and while the nurse took her temperature, Sadie said it plain, with days and names, exactly the way a windowsill sentence had taught her. Uncle Harlan, Gideon, 17. Daddy already agreed. The nurse, a mandated reporter, filed within the hour, because the law does not offer her a choice, which is the entire mercy of that law. So when my hotline report landed that Saturday morning, it did not open a case. It corroborated one. 2 accounts. Independent, days apart, matching on names and dates. A screener's photograph of the truth. The machine stood up and started to walk. A caseworker interviewed Sadie at school without her parents. Deputy Ostrander cross-reported, pulled marriage records and started calling counties. A subpoena went to a notary 2 counties over, who kept, exactly as Lorna promised, the most honest records in the world, and in Beulah Valley they discovered my empty bed. And the story assembled itself within a day, smooth as it always did. Megan had run wild, like Marnie before her. Pastor Farrell preached that Sunday on the thief of peace. My name stopped being said. My mother packed my clothes into a box, and it sat in the hall, I am told, for a week, because shunning me was doctrine, but throwing away my dresses was apparently beyond her, and I hold on to that. Then came the twist I had not budgeted for. The first formal complaint filed against me, theft of business records from Townsend Feed and Seed, carried my father's signature. He reported his own daughter for stealing the page his own hand had written her onto. The theft complaint went nowhere. A carbon copy of a page I was employed to keep is thin gruel, and Ostrander, I suspect, enjoyed explaining that to the lawyer Harlan paid for. But understand what that piece of paper was for. It was not for winning. It was scaffolding for a story about a disturbed girl who runs away and takes things. A story being built early, plank by plank, for a use nobody had announced yet. I lived that spring in a room above the laundromat on Cedar Street in Marion Falls, rent traded against bookkeeping for the owner, and I picked up 2 more small accounts by summer. The diner, the tire shop. I was poor in a way I had never been, and I slept better than I had in years. The box of my clothes arrived by way of a cousin's husband who would not meet my eye. No note. My mother's handwriting on the label, and nothing else. And I stood over that box a long time learning exactly what shunning is, not hatred. Bookkeeping. A person written off, the way you write off a debt you cannot collect. In April, Ostrander came to the laundromat. The case was real now, she said. Bigger than Sadie, the notary's files were a map of a decade. But to get a warrant for the original Covenant Fund ledgers, the county attorney wanted my carbon of page 41 sworn in, provenance and all. She put it plainly, because she is not in the business of softening things. On that page, in my father's hand, in a column adjacent to a minor's arrangement was evidence, and swearing to it would put Dale Townsend's name inside a criminal file, cosigner to the Covenant Fund's arithmetic. I took a day. I walked by the river. Then I signed the affidavit, and my hand was steady, and the pen was steady, and nothing else about me was. The subpoena went out on a Tuesday. On Friday, my mother called me for the first time in 4 months and begged me to stop. I did not stop. That phone call, my mother crying into the diner's phone line saying, "Megan, honey, come home. This can all still be mended," was the hardest wall I hit. Harder than Harlan. And I want to mark it honestly. I stood in the diner kitchen afterward and cried into a rack of clean glasses, and then I dried my face and posted the day's receipts, because that is what I know how to do with grief. What followed took 2 years, because the truth moves at the speed of paperwork. The notary's records opened the covenant fund like a walnut. 15 years, 11 settled notes, 6 marriages, 4 covenant gifts flowing the wrong direction, 2 of them attached to brides who had been 17. A grand jury in the county seat heard about Sadie's coat. Lorna drove from Ohio to testify about unamortized value, and I sat in a hallway with her for an hour, and we did not talk about Harlan at all. We talked about quilting and her grandson, and it was the most human hour I had spent in a year. Harlan Voss was indicted the fall I turned 27, fraud and conspiracy counts tied to arranging a minor's marriage across state lines. He posted bond the same day and preached forgiveness at Wednesday supper, I am told, to a hall that said, "Amen." Sadie turned 17 unmarried, then 18, safe. Her courtship dissolved by a family suddenly terrified of paperwork. She got her GED at my kitchen table above the laundromat. Tuesday nights, Mrs. Alvarez's back room grew. 2 girls, then 5, then a young mother from the next valley over, learning to fill out a separation petition. I turned 28. I thought the worst was behind me, and that the trial would be the end of the story. Then, 2 weeks before trial, a white truck parked outside the laundromat, and my mother stepped out first, and then my father, and then Harlan Voss, holding flowers, and a folder with my name on it. They filled my little room like a jury. My mother perched on the edge of the bed with her purse on her knees. My father stood by the door holding his hat, and Harlan sat at my table, laid the flowers on it, grocery store carnations, and some part of my brain noted that the man was worth $1 million in land and had bought carnations, and opened the folder. He was softer than I had ever seen him, and I understood I was watching his best work. Inside the folder, a petition, drafted and ready, for a mental health evaluation, supported by statements describing my history of instability. Running from home in the night. Paranoid beliefs that my family had sold me, theft, estrangement, and a letter, also drafted in my voice, a good imitation, someone had studied me, in which I recanted. I had been in crisis. My recollections were not reliable. I wished to withdraw my statements and come home. "Nobody wants you punished, Megan," Harlan said gently. "The county has twisted a family matter into a persecution. Sign, and it ends. I will forgive the farm's note entirely. Your parents will never owe another dollar. Dale's name comes out of it. And you come home." He turned the folder toward me, and the room smelled like carnations and my mother's lavender soap, and I looked at the supporting statements, at the first signature, the foundation of the whole clinical story of my broken mind, and it was my mother's. Attested and notarized, her careful Sunday school handwriting, swearing her daughter had always been a girl who imagined things. My mother watched me read it, and her face did not look like triumph. It looked like a woman paying an enormous bill she believed was owed. Then my mother got off the bed and knelt down on the floor of a room above a laundromat, and I stopped breathing. "Mama, get up." She would not get up. She took my hands in both of hers, flower hands, rose water, and lavender, the hands that taught mine to fold batter. And she said, "I am begging you, Megan. Sign it and come home. I will make up your room. Nobody will ever speak of any of this again. We can be a family. It can all be like it was." And here is the thing I have never said out loud until now. I wanted it. 2 years of shunning had not burned that want out of me, not 1 degree of it. I wanted my room and the smell of that kitchen and my mother's voice through a floor. Peace in this house is bought with your yes. The sentence rose up in me with its hand out, patient as ever, and for one long moment I felt my fingers curl toward the pen. Over her shoulder, I looked at Harlan. He was watching us with an expression I had never seen on him, and it was not victory. It was recognition. Tired, familiar recognition. A man watching a payment being extracted in a currency he knew down to his bones, because somewhere, sometime, a valley had extracted it from him too, and this was simply how the world was, and he had stopped imagining another one. It is the only moment I ever pitied Harlan Voss, and it lasted exactly as long as it took him to nudge the pen an inch toward my hand. I asked them for one night to think. My mother wept with relief. Harlan smiled. I kept the folder. I laid it all out on the table that night, side by side, Harlan's folder smelling faintly of carnations, and my carbon of page 41, soft at the folds from 2 years of being evidence, the pen between them. Want on the left? My mother, my room, the kitchen, the whole warm world with its one price printed clearly on the tag. On the right, a line in my father's handwriting, and under it, fainter, a line with Ruth's whole life in it. I called Ruth. She had a phone of her own now. Small mercies of an emptied guest house. Harlan's housekeeping arrangement had quietly ended when the indictment came down. She listened to the whole offer without a sound, and then my sister, who had once told me to sign, said something I am going to carry the rest of my life. The spring I turned 17, the Northfield debt to the Mercers got settled through Harlan's fund. Dad paid the fund $6,000 to broker it, right alongside my wedding. I found the receipt in Caleb's files in year 9, filed under equipment. She let that sit. It's the faint line, Meg. I know you found it. I know your month-end habits. Here's what I called to say. Sign that folder, and you'll be me. Home, safe, and filed under equipment. Don't sign, and you'll be alone in a way I never once dared. I can't choose it for you, but only one of those women can ever come back for the rest of us. I sat by the window a long time after, doing the only arithmetic that had ever really mattered, seeing it whole for the first time. My whole life I had believed my compliance was a shield over the younger girls, and it was an entry in their column too. My yes had always been part of the price of theirs. In the morning, I put on the blue dress my mother made me. I want you to know I understood exactly what I was doing when I chose it. And I carried both folders into the county attorney's office where Deputy Ostrander was waiting, because I had called her at 7, before fear was awake. The deposition room had a Formica table and a recorder with a red light and bad coffee, and I have never in my life been anywhere holier. I did not sign Harlan's folder. I entered it, handed it across the table, drafted recantation, notarized statements, forgiveness of debt offer and all, and watched it become the newest exhibit in the case. Because a defendant 2 weeks from trial, offering a witness money and her mother's love to call herself insane, is not making peace. He is tampering. And then I testified to all of it, plainly, with the red light on. Page 41. Both lines, the dark one with my name, and the faint one with Ruth's. The notary, the covenant gifts, the coat that fit. My voice stayed level the whole way through. 11 years of month-end closings will teach you that. When the county attorney asked, for the record, whether I understood that my statement implicated my own father in the fund's arrangements, I looked at the recorder and not away from it. And I said yes. And said the rest, the sentence I had been carrying since a porch in October. My father wrote in his ledger that a daughter is how a family pays its debts. I am not a payment. I am a person. And I would like every girl in that valley to hear which one of those the law believes. Through the hallway glass afterward, I saw them told that the folder was now evidence. My mother folded over her purse like a woman struck. And Harlan Voss, composed at his own indictment, composed for 54 years, raised his voice. Through 2 panes of glass I heard him, and I will not pretend some part of me didn't note it the way you note a long column finally coming to balance. There was no trial in the end. Witness tampering has a way of concentrating a defendant's attention, and Harlan's lawyers were good at their jobs. 10 days after my deposition, he took a plea. The fraud counts and a conspiracy count on Sadie's arrangement, years in state prison, the Covenant Fund dissolved under supervision, its notes voided. 9 families woke up owing him nothing. You would think that made me the Valley's hero, and if you think that, you have not been listening. The notes voided were the poisoned ones, the ones satisfied with daughters. My father's 41,000 was never satisfied. There had been no wedding, so it stood as what it had always been underneath the kindness rates, an ordinary debt, mortgaged against the farm. And the court-appointed receiver dissolving the fund had one job: collect what was owed to pay restitution to Harlan's victims. The receiver called the note. My family lost the land my great-grandfather cleared because of the man they chose over me, and I promise you no one in Beulah Valley tells it that way. They tell it the way Pastor Farrell told it that Sunday: the thief of peace, come back to finish the job. At the plea hearing, I sat in the second row. Harlan, gray in a suit, read a statement about his intentions being honorable within the traditions he was raised in, and the terrible thing, the thing I still think about at 2 a.m, is that I believe him. Across the aisle sat my parents. My father looked at his hat the whole time, and I finally recognized the posture. A man reading a ledger whose numbers have stopped adding up and will not start again. My mother looked at me once, in the hallway, across a distance farther than the county. She did not come toward me. I did not go toward her. Everyone kept asking, that year, whether I regretted it. It took me one more spring to know the answer. Here is the answer, and it does not look like a courtroom. It looks like the back room of the Marion Falls Library on a Tuesday night in spring, a year past the plea. 6 folding tables. Coffee that Mrs. Alvarez still refuses to let anyone else make. Sadie, 18 now, teaching 2 Valley kids to draw with charcoal, her GED framed on my wall because she insisted it live at my place. You bought it, she says, which is not true, and which we have stopped arguing about. A young mother from Creed's Crossing practicing, in pencil first, the words for a separation petition. And in the last row, hands folded, having driven 40 minutes and told no one, my sister Ruth, who came in October saying she was just dropping off jars, and stayed till 9, and has not missed a Tuesday since. She has a counselor now. She has a bank account nobody co-signs. We do not use big words about it. The valley itself stands where it always stood. The white church is full on Sundays. The road in is still the road out. My parents live in a small house by the creek now, and I hear my father does honest work for the man who bought our land, which is either a tragedy or a beginning, and from this distance I cannot always tell which, and have stopped needing to. Nobody dismantled the world I came from. That is not how it works. You do not get to burn down the arithmetic. You get to take your own name out of it, and leave the door standing open behind you, and keep the light on and the coffee bad, and let whoever needs the room find the room. Last month a card came in the mail with no return address. My mother's handwriting. No letter, no signature. Just her apple cake recipe, copied out in full, the one from the wedding cake lessons, with one line added at the bottom in her small, careful hand. It works just as well for birthdays. I put it on the windowsill. I have not written back. The word yet lives in my kitchen now, and it is mine, and nobody else gets to spend it. I used to believe love was a ledger you balanced by disappearing, and I know better now. The only debt a daughter truly owes is to become someone her younger self could run to, and to leave every door she ever escaped through unlocked for the next girl standing at the window, counting her chances. That's my story. 1 ledger page, 1 Tuesday night library room, and a recipe card with no signature. If somebody taught you that peace costs your yes, take this as your permission slip to say no. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone standing at their own window. Drop a comment below. I read them. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.